The epistle reading is Philippians chapter 2, beginning with the 5th verse. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even death on a cross. Therefore God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be God. As I was soaking in the delightful sight from the back, choir, children coming in, I thought, if somebody lived, I don't know where, in a secluded mountain in Tibet and flew to America and thought, I want to see what Christian life is like, I'll go to this church. They'd think we were crazy, right? Or somebody came from another planet. Like, what is this that is going on? And what we do here actually is a tamer version of what I experienced when I was pastor up in Davidson. I wonder if they still do this. The tradition there was the children would process in. They had a wider central aisle. So the children would kind of line the aisle, sort of, wait, and then the choir would come through, kind of gauntlet style. The choir would come through, and then the clergy would come. And somehow the tradition had been that when I, the last, would come along, the children would take their palm fronds and would swat me, like really hard. A couple of them did this today before we came in, including someone who lives with Dr. Kim. It was great. So we come to Holy Week. What a week for Jesus, right? Jesus came in on Palm Sunday. Everybody was confused. Nobody understood what it was about. Monday, Jesus comes back and he flips over the tables. My daughter Sarah preached on this a couple of weeks ago, and her sermon included the prayer, Lord, forgive me for the times I've craved a seat at a table that you would flip. Lord, forgive me for the times I've craved a seat at a table that you would flip. Jesus comes back on Tuesday and he teaches all day long and says things that make the Romans very nervous, the render unto Caesar thing. He's being a little smart alecky there. And so the Roman soldiers are already eyeing him. They're already plotting how to do him in. By Thursday, you have the Passover, and then he goes out to the Garden of Gethsemane. They arrest him. He's dead by Friday. What a week. What a week indeed. Was it a spiritual thing? Was it a political thing? The religious leaders thought it was a spiritual thing, and that threatened the daylights out of them. And the political leaders thought it was a political thing, and so together they conspired and just got rid of him. It's just easier to keep the status quo, right? All this week I've been thinking about marches that I have witnessed, read about, been a part of. Marches. On the Sunday after the Gaza war, if you can call it a war, broke out, the terrorists came over and did terrible things to some Israelis. Then Israel began its siege of Gaza the Sunday afternoon after that started. I was on my bicycle. I thought I'll just go downtown. It'll be a fun way to get some exercise. And there's a lot of racket downtown, and there's a huge march, hundreds and hundreds of people waving pro-Palestinian flags. Very upset about all that has been done to the Palestinians over time. But I knew there was also a gathering at one of our synagogues that day of Jews praying for Israel. Always that way. When George Floyd was killed, there were marches that happened all over the country. And some Christian pastors, I wasn't one of the leaders, got the idea that it might be kind of cool if the churches of Charlotte got together and just walked around Charlotte together. So we did. Conservative, progressive churches, white churches, black churches were singing hymns. I mean, it could not have been more innocuous and sweet. Somebody in the church saw a photo of me on Facebook from having been part of this and called me and said, "I can't believe you were one of the looters." I've never looted. I don't know any looters. There was no anyway, these things happen, of course. January 6th, back in the day, was known as the day of the Epiphany. And then in our family, it's known as my wife's birthday. But then January 6th got co-opted. And I just remember count me among those who was stunned and mortified by the images that we saw on the TV screen that day of people marching into, invading our Capitol building. I was mortified, but then I have a cousin that I've been close to all my life. I love her dearly. She was at that same time praying for the patriots that she was hoping would accomplish their mission. Always this way, the March on Washington in 1963, when King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. Fabulous moment, and many people looked on that with great suspicion and fear. In Selma, in 1965, they walked across that Edmund Pettus Bridge. John Lewis, once he got to the other side, was beaten within an inch of his life. We from our church went and walked across that bridge. I saw a photo this week of Allenby, the Brit, at the end of World War I. The powers of Western Europe decided it'd be a great idea, since they knew what was best for everybody, sort of in their arrogance, that they would divide up the rest of the world. So he marched through the Jaffa Gate into Jerusalem, thinking it was like a great hero's welcome, and it just set off so much disaster, because we never really know what's best for everybody else in the world. Sigmund Freud in the late 1800s, as I mentioned last Sunday, studied the collective psyche, and he fretted that there would be a day when people would be so confused and so fearful that a hypnotic leader who was evil could so hypnotize people that they would follow him and do anything that he wanted. And then Adolf Hitler came into Vienna, and Hitler said, "That's exactly what I was worried about." There are all kinds of marches, and people have different viewpoints, and in all of them, they're trying to do something. They look at the world, and it confuses them. It makes them afraid, and they can't just stay at home anymore. They've got to go to the street and do something, and then there are always differing viewpoints over what it is. There are other kinds of marches that we've all been part of. We've probably all marched to a grave site at the cemetery to say goodbye to someone that we've loved and lost. Many of us have marched in graduations, the educated going out into the world to try to be somebody. First hot Sunday of this season, I saw a line of people outside Two Scoops ice cream shop. Concert goers stand in line, shoppers stand in line to get in the mall when they have those special sale days. All these people are on a quest to kill time, to find purpose, to fulfill their lives, to, I don't know, fill in the blank. Why do human beings do such things? Jesus sets off a march on Palm Sunday. He starts at the top of the Mount of Olives. I've had the privilege of walking that route so many times. He descends a very sharp hill down into the Kidron Valley and then back up an equally steep hill into the city of Jerusalem. I've walked it back and forth dozens of times, and when I've done it, I've tried to think, what were people thinking? They were waving those palm branches. They were singing. For instance, they were singing, we know this, Psalm 118, which includes the line that we love, "This is the day the Lord has made." We think, oh, God made another day. The Israelites in those days, when they sang that, they would have translated it, if they knew English, "This is the day on which the Lord has acted," or "This is the day on which the Lord has shown up." Man, did Jesus ever show up that day, right? Big crowd, they're all excited. Made the Romans very, very nervous indeed. And Jesus looked, and no one really understood what he was about. He had so much courage, so much hope. He was gentle. He was so full of love. And I like to wonder who was in the crowd that day. A few days before Jesus has healed blind Bartimaeus in Jericho, did he not follow Jesus to Jerusalem to cheer him on there in the crowd? Mary Magdalene surely was in that crowd. James, the brother of Jesus, surely he was there. Why? Since they were little kids playing together, there's Jesus on the donkey. Crowds in a tumult over his being there. His mother, it's not mentioned, but surely his mother was in the crowd. You might think, oh, I'm so proud of my son. Look how well he's done. But I'm sure she did not think that. I'm sure she understood, she intuited that he was courting danger, and she feared for his life. I wonder if you and I can think of ourselves by some miracle of God's mysterious grace as being present in that somehow. But a friend of mine wrote a poem a while back that goes like this. He never attended church. He never described himself as religious. So why in his dementia is Hosanna my husband's most frequent word? Well, that is after bang, bang, and boom, boom. I choose to believe his soul is speaking. Isn't that interesting? Somebody who's never been to church and we say something like Hosanna. Jesus came for all people, not just the people who got it, which there would have been none in that crowd, and not just for people like us, because we wander around just as confused as everybody else. He came for all people. I've thought about this. When Jesus came into Jerusalem, surely the Roman soldiers were already eyeing him very carefully. They were mingling among the crowd to be sure nothing broke out. They probably were lining the street just to be sure nothing got out of control. There's so much excitement about this one that some think is the Messiah that will overturn Rome. The Roman soldiers are already eyeing him. And did Jesus look at them and think ahead to what would happen that week, that some of those very soldiers would be the ones who would mock him and kill him? And as he hangs from the cross, he looks down, and they're not praying, they're not worshiping him, they're laughing at him, they're gambling for his clothing. Terrible people. And what does Jesus say? Jesus doesn't say, God, call down a curse upon these wicked men. No. Jesus looks at them and says, Father, forgive them. Like that's all you need to know about the heart of God, is that Jesus can forgive them. If you think you or someone you know is just beyond the pale, Jesus forgave them. Howard Thurman, the great theologian from the 40s and 50s, had a huge influence on Martin Luther King, was really a mentor to him. He wrote these words: I wonder what was at work in the mind of Jesus as he jogged along on the back of that faithful donkey. Perhaps his mind was far away to the scenes of his childhood, feeling the sawdust between his toes in his father's shop. He may have been remembering the high holy days in the synagogue with his whole body quickened by the echo of the ram's horn. Perhaps he was thinking of his mother, how deeply he loved her, and how he wished that there had not been laid upon him this great necessity that sent him out on the open road to proclaim the truth, leaving her side forever. It may be that he lived all over again that high moment on the Sabbath when he was handed the scroll and he unrolled it to the great passage from Isaiah, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach good news to the poor. I wonder what was moving through the mind of the Master as he jogged along in the back of that faithful donkey. And what was on the mind of the people? Luckily, a few years back, I scored a podcast interview with Tim Rice, the lyricist for Jesus Christ Superstar and a great many other musicals. I think he got it right on Palm Sunday. Jesus comes in, the crowd sings, Hosanna, hey, Zanna, Zanna. We should have the choir do this as an anthem soon. Hey, Zanna, 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 Hosanna, Hosanna, hey, Zanna. Hey, JC, won't you smile for me? And then they turn to, hey, JC, won't you fight for me? And then they turn to, hey, JC, won't you die for me? Jesus is haunted by those words. I try to think what was on Jesus' mind. Jesus came into the city. He was not angry. Some who followed him were angry, and some who follow him today are angry. And Jesus welcomes those who are angry, just as Jesus welcomes those who are fearful. And those would be the same people. The angry people are the fearful people. And to the angry and fearful, Jesus says, come to me, and I will give you rest. Jesus came in, and even though the Romans worried about it, he had no desire forcibly to overthrow the government. It's not because Jesus didn't care about government. Jesus knew that all governments will be judged. There is no government that can deliver the day. It's why our political ideologies are so false. You think, oh, if our party just can get into power, but this is false. It's a fool's errand. They all will be judged. They were all lacking. That's why Jesus didn't really want to overthrow the government. Parenthetically, there's this thing that's not in my notes, and I probably shouldn't say it, but I said it at 8:30 and at the 8:45 service, so I'll give you guys a crack at me as well. Those, the people in the crowd there, the Jews that lived in Jerusalem, they felt like victims, and they were victims. Israel had been invaded by the Romans. Judea was not an independent country any longer. The Romans ruled with an iron fist. Those people were victims. They could not choose their culture. They could not choose their government. And sometimes here in America, we act as if we are victims. People talk like, oh, we're victims of terrible government. We're victims of terrible political leaders. We're victims of a culture that has too much. We talk about we're just such victims. We're such martyrs, the way we do the victim thing. And I think theologically, I just want to remind us all that we live in a democracy. Like, you got some choices. We get the government that we vote for, right? No army comes in from the outside and imposes government on us. Like, we're the ones that vote. If you don't like the culture, we're the ones that turn on the TV and pay to go to the movies and shop and do all that. We're not victims. And then there's this, back to the January 6th thing. Some people attach the adjective Christian to a lot of things. And so theologically, I want to think back to that march. And I don't care if you're conservative, progressive, what you are politically, but this is the thing. You can't call parts of that Christian. There were some who, they went in there and they actually prayed to Jesus on the floor of the house. I don't know if you saw that, while holding up symbols of hate, a rebel flag, a swastika, shirts that celebrated Auschwitz. I mean, theologically, as church people, we have to say, this is not us. This cannot stand. This is not Christian. We're not just victims. Jesus didn't want to forcibly overthrow the government, didn't try to. Jesus was sad, but he wasn't really grieving, or at least not yet. Jesus' sorrow that day is so interesting. Before he got on the donkey to come into the city, he sat up on a hillside overlooking the holy city of Jerusalem, the hope of the world, and he wept. There was so much potential there, so much glory there that could have been, but the people had squandered it. They had frittered it away, and Jesus grieved for them. Jesus grieved for the world that was supposed to look to this place to be the bright light. Jesus was teaching when he came in on that donkey. He was showing us a better way. Jesus had no arrogance. Jesus was humble. Jesus was showing us the way of sacrifice. Try running for office in 2024 and tell people, folks, what you've got to do is sacrifice. You wouldn't get one vote. You would get one. I'd vote for you, but you wouldn't get any more. That'd kind of be it. But Jesus shows us that the way to life is the way of sacrifice. It's a way of holiness. It's not a way of greed or grabbing. Jesus is quiet that day. Jesus shows us that the way to life isn't through more and more racket and busyness and franticness, but Jesus knows how to be still, how to be quiet. Jesus on that day loved his enemies. Jesus on that day loved his false friends. Jesus on that day loved his feeble friends. Jesus that day loved. A couple more things, I'll be done. I want to think about the little donkey. So many great leaders through history had horses that were so famous we know their names. Alexander the Great rode on Bucephalus, and Robert E. Lee rode on Traveler. Jesus did not find a great war stallion to intimidate anybody. Instead, he came in on a little donkey, and it wasn't even his donkey. It was a borrowed donkey. Gosh, didn't even own a donkey. The donkey was a beast of burden, and as Martin Luther put it, Jesus comes not to frighten, but to bear our burdens. That donkey, as the Gospels are at pains to tell us, had never been ridden, it had never been trained, it had never been broken. You would expect the donkey not to be good at carrying his passenger. You would think in the midst of all the racket and tumult that that donkey would bolt, but that donkey never bolted. The donkey just walked straight ahead. Did the donkey sense, this is a gentle person who is riding me. This is someone very special who is riding me. I'm here for a purpose. You know, when Jesus sends the disciples out to go find the donkey, what does he say? He says, tell the owner the Lord has need of it. I love that. The Lord has need of this donkey. And I think that's God's invitation to you and to me and to everyone. The Lord has need of you. The Lord has need of us. The Lord has need of our church. The Lord needs us to follow Jesus. The Lord needs us to be those who can be people of peace, not arrogant, loving others, not following for political ideologies, finding the way to peace, to act. Here's the last thing. Howard Thurman, he wrote this great poem that often we read right after Christmas, and there's a choral anthem that our choir has sung. It's really lovely. And you may know the words to it. It's when the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and the princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flocks, then the work of Christmas begins. I thought I would try to compose a similar poem for the work of Holy Week. I didn't have time to make it very fancy, but here goes. When the cries of Hosanna are stilled, when the palms are put back in their places, when Pilate and Herod are home, then the work of Holy Week begins, to find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among brothers, to make music in the heart. When I was a little kid, I wanted to march so badly. My parents would turn on the news. I'd see people on the streets. I'd beg them, let me go march. I want to go march. This is the greatest thing. I want to go march. They say, you're 5, you're 7. You can't go march. Oh, please, I want to go march. And then I grew up and I was old enough and nobody was marching any longer. Like, dang. But I went to Duke Divinity School in the opening worship service. We started out in the hallway and we processed into York Chapel, and as we came in, we sang, we are marching to Zion. I thought, here it is. We're marching. We're marching. We're the folks who march with Jesus. No one else. We march with Jesus, marching toward his future, marching toward his hopeful good end, marching wherever he leads us. Thanks be to God.